Hello and welcome to my bouncing ball lesson. There are a lot of bouncing ball tutorials on the internet, so thank you for clicking on mine. The bouncing ball is a staple of animation, so it is important that you get this down because it covers a lot of principles that will be useful to you in the future if you continue animating. So, why do we do a bouncing ball? We use a bouncing ball as practice to apply multiple of the 12 principles of animation to our future animations. It helps you get used to how to use them, when to apply them, and it's just good practice overall. So we're going to utilize timing, arcs, weight, and squash and stretch. Now you can go a little bit further, and I'll get into that later, but there are other elements you can add, other principles that you could utilize in the bouncing ball, which is why it's so universally used as practice. So later on that, but for now, we're going to start, and I'm going to note that I'm on 24 frames per second, but I'm going to be working on twos, and working on twos just means for every drawing that I do, I'm just going to double it. So technically it'll be at 12 frames a second, but you start with 24 because then if you want to add more frames later, you can just add a 1 in between some of the twos, because if you were just working at 12 frames, then you wouldn't be able to add more. You'd be stuck on twos. So that's why we do 24. And I will do it on ones as well. I'll just go in after I've done it on twos. If you can nail it on twos, you probably don't need to do it on ones, but it's good to have just so you can see them compared side by side and you can make that distinction for yourself. You can maybe choose to do ones, and that might be better for you. You might prefer it. It looks smoother, but you might not be able to add as much punch. I usually hybrid the two of them. Sometimes I do 3s or 4s, depending on what's moving, how much needs to be said. So, anyway. Timing. I will say timing is probably the key element of these principles, and I'll show you why. So we usually will lay out what the action of what we're doing is before we start doing any animation. So I will bring up my timer, which is very useful, and I will put in my description if you need a link. It's just a little application. You'll pull up this timer, and it's useful because all you have to do is click, hold down, and it'll show you how long you held, and it'll convert that into frames from seconds. So you just tell it what your frame rate is right here, and then it'll convert it based on how long you held it down, and it's super useful for delivering any action. And it just resets every time you do it, so you don't have to like erase anything. When you're using the timer for a more dramatic action, you would go further and mark where the keyframes would appear in that certain set amount of time, however long that action was going to take. You'd do, I don't know, 1, 3, 7, 9, wherever the main points of whatever action you were doing would appear, just to get a rough layout of where things are, and that's called a timing chart. But I'm not going to do that because I've done this enough times. I know where the main points of the bouncing ball are. But for anything else, I would definitely use the timer more frequently for more dramatic actions. So you'll click on this, just play it back in your head, think about how long you want it to be bouncing. It'll probably be like 3 seconds. If you think 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 arcs. So I just play it in my head as if I was doing it normally, or if you have a reference video, that's fine too. If you have a ball that you bounced, you can use a reference, and then you'll just record it with this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It'll be maybe 60 frames if I do it on twos at 24 frames a second. So just keeping that number in mind when you do that. So I have it set to 60. Perfect. You're going to start with drawing the arcs out, because the arcs are very important, specifically in bouncing a ball, but also in all of animation. Arcs do, in fact, appear more frequently than you would think. So those are roundabout. I can probably make this one a little taller, because arcs exponentially decrease as they happen, naturally. Waves and all that, there's science behind it. I'm not a scientist. But naturally, the arcs will decrease as they go. So, just stretch that out as my background, and so that'll be there. And so we're going to shoot for maybe the weight of a tennis ball, I think, or a racquetball. You can go for like a beach ball or even a bowling ball, and it would not have as many arcs if it was a bowling ball. If it was a beach ball, it would float a little more. So that's where the weight principle comes in, and that's something to take into account before you start. You could go for a bouncy ball, and these arcs might be the same height for a while. Or with a bowling ball, it would just hit, maybe bounce an inch off the ground, and then it'd be done. So, just something to note. Weight, in delivering actions, weight is a very big seller of what's happening. And then there is also an exponential decrease along with the arcs in the squashing of the ball. So here at the bottom on the impact, you'll squash the ball down, and you can choose how much you want to do that. I like to go really extreme. I like to go pretty big. So that might be like, it looks like a lot if I said that the ball was just this big. We'll say it's that big, maybe a little smaller. But it squashes down to this, and it's super thin. And you want to try and keep the same proportions. You want to have however much empty space is in the middle, should be the same amount of empty space in theory down here. So I will make this bigger actually. Okay. And I'm trying to keep it round. It's not super important, unless you were turning this in for a student film, which I'm not. So all the way down to here, it's going to squash, and it's going to compress a decent amount. And you might think this is too much, but I'm just going to put this on a different frame. I will compare it. There will be more in-betweens there, but I will compare it to a slightly less squashed one once this is played out, and you can see the difference. I'll emphasize that. But for now, I'm going to keep it my way, and it's going to stay squashed like that. And then you're going to stretch immediately after. It would be that. Something like that. I like to go pretty extreme when it comes to squashing and stretching. I go extreme on my extremes. These are the extremes, are the downs, the ups, and the peaks. Oh, I should mention, I'm working pose to pose rather than straight ahead. There's a differentiation. Those are the two different ways to animate 2D. You can do pose to pose, which is drawing out keyframes, which is what most people do for most actions. If you have a plan in mind of when you want an action to start and stop, you would use pose to pose. But if you're doing straight ahead, you would use that for actions like an effect, like fire or water flow, maybe wind, anything that would be more fluid, less rigid, something that wouldn't have a specific start and stop, and something that you would want to make look more naturalistic through randomness. And, you know, there's an argument to be said for keeping too much rigidity by doing pose to pose, but you can get goofy with it as long as you abide by the principles, you know? So we're doing pose to pose, we're drawing the keyframes, and I'm gonna squish. I'll switch between doing this and that. I'll come back to these, but for now I would do the keyframes normally. I would go top and then bottom, and here exponentially it would squish less, but still a decent amount. Let's say maybe here. Right? That was super flat. I might actually push this a little flatter. A little flatter to try and keep that same. I don't have a calculator. I can't figure out if that's all the same. But still squished, not as much. I will try, here I'll draw a ground line as well, so that we have a place for the impact to make sure it's hitting the right spots. There we go, squashing properly. Then we'll go back up to this peak, draw it again, back down to here. Probably not too squished here. Probably just a little oblong. Like, that's probably good. Gonna grow these up again. Try and keep that same space. Okay. that one's a little bit. Sorry, I'm all over the place. Back up to here. Just a little hop, not a lot of energy transition between there and there. Not a lot of momentum carried from that small bounce. Back to a squish, but squash, sorry, I keep saying squish. That one's probably not gonna do much of any on that last one. Just to really emphasize how it's losing that momentum. And then maybe a tiny hop here. Now, I could cheat and copy the last frame and paste it, but I don't like doing that. I like to, every moment is practice. I keep practicing my circles, and as you've seen, they've gotten progressively more accurate to that same shape, because I've been practicing. And then here, finally, final squash. And it's not gonna, it's gonna stay that rigid. Maybe another tiny hop. Maybe a tiny hop. And then we'll do a final extreme down here. I don't know how many in-betweens I'll need for it to convey that stop rolling. Maybe one more in-between there. Probably do an in-between here. You could cheat and use the circle tool as well, and I won't hold that against you if you want. But that's not for me. I like everything to be hand-drawn. Just a personal preference. So, we have the keyframes. We'll go back through, do the in-betweens, and then we will add, I'm just gonna double all the frames. Right now it's on ones. I'll play it through for you, just so you can see how fast it's going. It's too fast. And it doesn't have any, right? It's got no in-betweens. But you can tell it's a ball. It's bouncing. It's keeping that same shape. It's keeping that momentum. It's not terrible. In-betweens will make it look better, I promise. So when I'm doing my in-betweens, look here and here. So I think I'll do 3 in-betweens here. And what I've learned is if you do an impact, I'll do 2 in-betweens. If you do an impact in between right before the impact, you should make it almost contact where it's about to hit. And that really helps deliver the next frame, which is the complete, it's essentially the opposite of what's happening in the frame before. So it really sells the action. And I should fix this actually. This is even bigger than after the impact, which we know would not happen because it's transferring that same shape. So it shouldn't be. It should be almost identical, if not less, than the in frame. It should be, I'll go a little smaller actually. There we go. And then I'll do one up here, a little closer to the top, and a little stretched, just so that it starts into that down. And I might be able to add one here, but we'll play through it once with everything in between, and then we can add more. That's the beauty of this. You can add more whenever you want. It's a hybrid. So I'll add one here, since I already have this in between. And then one here. Starting to stretch out. Oops, I didn't add that frame. There we go. A little bit less stretched than the one before. Roundabout where this one is. I may end up adding frames in between those. We'll see. Doing up. Do. There we go. Go back down. And you want to make sure that you're stretching wherever you're squashing and stretching. You're stretching in the line of action. So you're, maybe line of action isn't the right word. You're stretching along where the gravity, where the momentum is going. Like if I were to throw something, I would throw it in this direction, and so the ball would be stretching this way, you know? If a bird is blurring past quickly, it would stretch with the momentum of where it was going, you know? You get it. Anyway, impact. A little less stretch out because it's not stretching too much on the in. So make note of that lack of motion. And this is the in, but it's really not going to stretch too much because it's not moving too fast anymore. It's lost all that energy. And we might even just do a straight in between. No accounting for speed, just because it's loose and fast. And to slow it down, we will add more frames, because more frames equals slower. Remember that. If you ever want something to be a smaller action, somebody to make a much more slight expression or a slight movement, you would do a lot of frames to really break it down and make sure that it has the right poise to it. If somebody's wiping away a tear, you wouldn't do it quickly. You'd do it much slower. You'd do a lot of frames, though, so it would be deceiving. You'd think it's less work. So we might even go 2 in-betweens here. Do one here. And then even... maybe even another one right here. There we go. Look at that. Right there. All right, cool. So we'll play it back. Uh-oh, I passed my 60 mark. Shucks. All right, well, then we just add some more. What am I at, 32? It's 4 more than I anticipated. Almost had it. I thought I could have done it. Okay. Stretch this out. We'll play it on ones just to see how it looks. I think I would need to almost double it to make it really sold on ones, but it might look okay. Nah, it's really fast. Yeah. I'll definitely need to add more for ones. But I like how it comes to a stop here. I'll extend this one out. We're gonna need even more frames, darn. I might, yeah, it would look better on ones for that. Anyway, it's not what we're doing it on twos. So, extend it out so you can see that hold. So there it is on twos. And it looks not bad. I think I want to... So, if something looks slightly off, what you can do is you can just move the frame to make a little more sense. So if you go a little bit closer to the impact, that can help. Or if you go closer to where it will impact, that can help. I think maybe that was my issue, is that I went too close to one or the other. So this will sell that it holds when it hits and then holds when it's about to hit. And that'll just sell the action a little bit better. Hopefully. And hopefully you're even seeing what I'm saying, because otherwise I could just be nitpicking. I think that looks a little better. So it'll help when I do it on ones in that specific area, because then I can go with more detail. And I even think that maybe this bounce at the end is a little too high. like it should almost contact sooner rather than later. So this would be a tennis ball drop from like waist height. I'll add a frame here just to see if that helps. And that's all that animation really is. That you should keep that in mind, is that this is just all an experiment. So if something doesn't look absolutely perfect first try, then just try it again. So we'll see how that looks. Don't forget to save. Honestly, I think that looks better, so keep it, you know? Maybe we'll add one here as well. There. Oh, did I miss this? No, that was the out. It just didn't stretch as much. We'll add one here and see how that looks, because I think I might not have made it enough, you know? It's just not enough. And there's no, like, you don't have to make sure that they're touching to really sell it. It's just something that I'm trying. There's no real precedent for it. Just experiment slightly. And I gave myself the precedent that I was going to do 2 or 3 or however many before I started. And then I saw that it didn't work. And then I went in and fixed it. So just, it requires that you hone your eye and are honest with yourself when you see a mistake and see, oh, that could be improved. Could be improved. I don't like this bounce. I think I'm gonna take it out. I'm just gonna make this closer to the ground. Closer to the ground. This needs to be closer to the ground. And I want this even closer to the ground. I think I'm just gonna not have it bounce so much. I think it'll just be done after 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That was 5. Now I've made them too close to one side. I'm making a mess. That looks better. Here, I'll take the arc out so you can see it all by itself. Now, the other good part about the bouncing ball is that there are other exercises you can do with it to add to it and give yourself an extra challenge. And there's a main action, which would be the ball, and then any kind of accessory or like a cape for the bouncing ball. Specifically, the exercise would be to add a tail. And so you would add the tail to the back end of it, and based on where the main body of the ball is, the tail will follow. And it's usually 1 or 2 frames behind, depending on, again, the weight of that object. So if it was a cape, it might be 2 frames behind, but with a tail, since it's attached right at the main part of the ball, it would probably be 1 frame behind. So it's just, there are other exercises you could add. You could make there be a stripe on the ball, and then you could pay attention specifically to the rotation of it as it's bouncing. You might need a reference video for that so that you could keep track of it yourself, because that would be more difficult. I don't know where I would start on this just off the top of my head. You could add a guiding line and kind of go from there, but to add depth to something, you'd really have to be aware of where it was in space to track that. So something else to keep in mind. One of the other principles that you could apply would be appeal. So you could add an end gag where it comes to a stop and then it gets squished or it deflates or something like that. And appeal is really a generic principle. You can do anything that you think increases the appeal of whatever you're making is technically appeal. So the color of it, the act, the personality, that's all appeal. So something else that you could add to it to really make it pop as an animation solid drawing is a principle, and to me that just means keeping the ball roundabout the same shape, which we did here, hopefully, ish, you know. I tried my best to keep it about the same size at the very least, but for a more useful application, that would be for maybe character animation. If you had a character sheet, you'd just want to stay on model and make sure that what you were making every frame was something that would still apply to what that character looked like at any other angle. That would be solid drawing. And then staging would be, staging is more of the setting of what's happening, the perspective, the horizon line, anything in the background, where the subject is placed on that background, that's all staging. Something else would be planning out where that object is going. So if I had the ball bouncing into a cup, I would have to stage the bounce so that it would land in the cup. That would also be staging. So other things to keep in mind. You can mess with this, you can add anything you want, but that's all that I have. I'll do a really quick edit here, and I will go through and add in between frames to put it on ones, and then I will show you that result. I'm back. I finished the ones. Haven't looked at it yet, but I'll play this and then I'll go back to the twos and you can see for yourself which one you prefer. Just something to keep in mind. And I could go through and find where it's really successful on twos or where it's really successful on ones, and then kind of mush them together and figure out, oh, I can accelerate here, I can pause here, I can hold a little longer, I can go on twos, I can go on threes. I could have just not drawn those last couple of balls where it's just sitting still and just done the one, but it adds a little more life to keep going. Personal opinion. Anyway, here it is on ones. It's more smooth, but it feels a lot slower, and that's not what I want. So, just something to keep in mind. And I could take some frames out, but it does look smoother, more smooth. But here's twos. Choppier, but I feel like the bounces, the arcs, the tops, the holds look a little bit better. And these are the same keyframes, just more frames on the ones as opposed to the twos. Here, I'll play them in tandem. Okay. Just so you can see them side by side. Bottom one is ones, top one is twos. So, again, personal preference as to which one you want. Okay, and I forgot, I'll go through on the twos and change this impact here. I promised I would. So you can see how it would look if it was much less, so that you do know for a fact that I know what I'm talking about when I say to push your extremes. Because if I go even slightly like here, and then we'll go less here too, just to really nullify the impact of each of these, and that one's pretty null anyway. I'll get rid of these. Okay. Just take note of how little that impact is as opposed to, here, I'll undo it. So, play them side by side and you can see which one looks better. I personally like the one that's much more extreme. I think the one on the top is too, well, actually, that might just be me. The weight is off because it would be less bounce. There. There's just less kickback when it's going back up. Same with the stretch on the in and the out. We could push these. To be even less. And it'll be sold not as well. See, I mean, the positioning is the same, but the message is different. So you don't get as much speed. There's no implicit momentum. So, just my personal opinion. If you want to go less crazy with it, be my guest. I can't stop you. I might tell you you're wrong. No, I won't. Anyway, hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully I have answered any questions you might have had about the bouncing ball. If you have any other questions about things that I have covered or didn't cover that I should have, you can leave a comment or you can join the Discord. I'll put that link in the description as well. There's a lot of information there, so if that isn't covered in whatever question you have, then feel free to ask me, and I'll do my best to get back to everybody. So, other than that, like and subscribe if this was helpful, and if not, you can tell me about it, and I'll do my best to improve. Take it easy.